Imagine for a moment a food item, but one so potent, so deeply, ingrained in human culture that for millennia it hasn't just been about what people prefer to eat. Instead, it's actually served as a defining line, almost a boundary between entire civilizations. It's shaped identity, belief, and even, well, the very fabric of politics. Few foods in history carry that much symbolic weight or provoke quite as much cultural division as pork. We're not just talking about taste here, we're talking about something that cuts right to the core of who societies are.
Indeed, it's a really compelling question, isn't it? Why this particular animal, while, countless other ancient food restrictions have sort of faded away, become historical footnotes, the prohibition against eating pig has, surprisingly, only sharpened its edges over time. It's become more pronounced, not less. So this deep dive is definitely for you, whether you're looking to understand that intricate dance of cultural identity, or maybe the evolution of religious law, or perhaps you're just curious about how an everyday animal really could become such a profoundly powerful symbol.
Yeah, because when we first think about a ban on pork, many of us might, instinctively jump to the practical stuff. Maybe it's about hygiene, pigs getting diseases or ecological reasons like them not being great for arid climates. Those are the usual narratives. But what if we told you the story is far, far more complex than that? Today, we're going to really try and unpack this fascinating journey.
That's exactly right. While those practical theories, championed quite effectively by earlier thinkers like Marvin Harris, they offered really influential explanations early on. But then scholars like Mary Douglas came along and fundamentally shifted the whole discussion. She really shone a light on how pollution beliefs are rarely just about practical worries. They're often profound expressions of a culture's symbolic order, a carefully constructed framework of meaning they impose on the world. And adding another layer here, archaeological evidence complicates things even more. It shows the ban wasn't always uniformly practiced, not even in ancient Israel.
Okay, so what's our mission for this deep dive? We're taking your sources, this great stack of articles, research, critical analyses, and we're going to trace the incredible twisting journey of the pig prohibition. Our exploration aims to show how something that started as maybe a localized food restriction evolved, not into obscurity, no, but into one of the world's most enduring, identity-defining, and frankly, globally significant taboos.
Exactly. We'll chart the pig's remarkable transformation. From being seen initially as a kind of cosmic anomaly in early biblical thought, then becoming a cultural antagonist under the huge pressures of Greco-Roman influence, and finally evolving into a theological absolute deeply embedded within Islam. This isn't just a story about food, about what people ate or didn't eat. It's really a powerful narrative about how societies, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, use food to draw those lines of identity, of belonging, and, yes, of profound difference.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We're going to try and unravel how this single, seemingly ordinary animal managed to become such a profound boundary marker, an emblem whose meaning, whose power shifted so dramatically across time and culture, and, crucially, why its symbolic punch persists so strongly even today. Let's dive in. Okay, so when we think about forbidden foods, our minds often jump straight to the practical stuff, right? Health concerns, environmental impact, maybe just basic resource management. Makes sense. But our sources introduce us to this anthropologist, Mary Douglas, who, back in the mid-20th century, offered a truly groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting perspective. Okay, let's start to unpack her big idea.
Well, what's truly fascinating here is that Douglas, in her classic work, Purity and Danger, she fundamentally challenged that whole notion that ancient pollution beliefs were just primitive hygiene rules or superstitious fears. Instead, she argued they are profound, quite sophisticated expressions of a culture's symbolic order. Think of it as a meticulous, often unspoken system of meaning that a society imposes on the world around it, which can often feel chaotic. For Douglas, impurity isn't necessarily about something being inherently dirty or diseased in our modern sense. Rather, it emerges when something fails to fit neatly into its designated category within that cultural system, when it's, to use her very famous phrase, matter out of place.
Right, so if I'm getting this, she's saying societies kind of create this mental blueprint, a sort of detailed cosmic taxonomy to classify everything: animals, plants, people, actions. And anything that blurs those carefully drawn lines, anything that doesn't fit snugly into one box, suddenly becomes problematic, impure.
Precisely. Think of it like a carefully organized mental filing cabinet that every society uses, implicitly. You've got drawers for clean animals, unclean animals, things that fly, things that crawl, and so on. Anything that seems to belong in two contradictory drawers at once, or maybe doesn't fit properly into any drawer, becomes anomalous. And therefore, according to Douglas's logic, it becomes impure or polluting. Now, the pig in ancient Israelite thought is presented in texts like Leviticus is like the perfect example of this anomaly. It has cloven hooves, right? That's a characteristic it shares with animals explicitly designated as clean, like cattle, sheep, goats, stuff you can eat. But, and this is the crucial part, it does not chew the cud, which is an absolute non-negotiable requirement for those very same clean animals.
Okay, so let's contrast that to make it super clear. A cow, for instance, it's got both the cloven hooves and it chews the cud. Fits perfectly. Clean, no problem. A camel, well, it chews the cud but doesn't have a fully cloven hoof, so it's in a different category, unclean, but it's consistent within the system's rules. But the pig, it seems to almost deliberately mess with the system. It's got one key feature of the clean group, but conspicuously lacks the other essential one. It's like a puzzle piece that looks like it should fit, but then you realize one edge is completely wrong. It jars the whole picture.
That's a really good way to put it. For Douglas, the pig isn't dangerous because it might carry disease, although that could be true, or because it's ecologically tricky in a desert, may be also true. Its threat, its impurity in this symbolic sense, comes from the fact that it disrupts the fundamental order that a society like ancient Israel tried to impose on its world. It's a challenge to their whole carefully constructed, patterned cosmos, not just a simple health risk. It's about maintaining symbolic purity, the integrity of a world ordered by what they understood as divine law. This is the big shift Douglas offered. The pig's impurity isn't fundamentally in its physical nature, but in its symbolic ambiguity, its refusal to fit neatly.
So for Douglas, the pig's danger isn't really about getting sick at all. It's about its challenge to this meticulously ordered symbolic universe. It's about, like, cosmic tidiness, keeping things symbolically neat. That's a huge reorientation from just thinking about practical worries, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. It fundamentally flips our usual understanding of ancient taboos. It really highlights how deeply these symbolic rules can be embedded in everyday practices, and how absolutely central they can be to a culture's self-understanding, its very identity. However, and this is important, as our sources also stress, now symbolic anthropology is incredibly powerful. It can't, on its own, fully resolve the historical complexity of this specific prohibition, which raises the question, okay, if it's about symbolic order, what was actually happening on the ground? How did people really live with this rule? This theoretical foundation gives us a powerful lens, definitely. But the archaeological evidence and a closer look at the texts will show that the story of the pig is much more dynamic, more multifaceted than just a simple symbolic rule. So let's dig into what the ancient texts actually say and what the dirt and bones tell us.
Okay, so if Mary Douglas gives us this really profound symbolic why, this abstract reason, where do we actually first find the command? Where in the ancient text does it say explicitly, do not eat pork? Where does this specific prohibition get written down? And importantly, how is it framed?
That's a perfect transition. It takes us straight to two foundational texts in the Hebrew Bible, Leviticus chapter 11 and Deuteronomy chapter 14. These are the key passages where the dietary laws, the kashrut laws for ancient Israel, are really laid out. Now, what's really fascinating here is that while both passages clearly identify the pig as unacceptable for that same reason, cloven hoof but no cud chewing, they frame the prohibition with subtly different theological functions. This really underscores its multivalence, its layers of meaning. They're both talking about the pig, yes, but maybe for slightly different, though equally important reasons, reflecting different aspects of Israelite life and belief. All right, let's look at Leviticus 11 first. This text places the dietary rules within a much larger, overarching priestly concern. The whole book of Leviticus is saturated with this focus on purity, holiness, and the proper functioning of the sanctuary. The language in Leviticus constantly emphasizes these precise distinctions: clean versus unclean, holy versus common. It embeds these food laws into a comprehensive cosmic taxonomy.
This system defines Israel's unique, sacred relationship with God and with creation itself. Scholars who dig into Leviticus, like Peter Altman and Anna Angelini, they highlight that these regulations are fundamentally about, quote, ritual dimensions concerned with the purity and holiness of the sanctuary, unquote. So in this context, avoiding anomalous animals like the pig animals that blur those divinely set categories is about reinforcing the sacred order, an order centered on Yahweh's presence dwelling among the people of Israel. So in Leviticus, you could say the pig is less about everyday diet for sustenance, and maybe more about marking one's ritual fitness, one's participation in this whole cosmic grammar of holiness, which is absolutely crucial for maintaining the sanctity of the community, especially near the divine presence.
That makes a lot of sense. It frames it as a deeply ritualistic act, drawing these really important lines between the sacred and the profane in a very tangible, edible way. Okay, and then we have Deuteronomy 14. Does it just repeat the same message, or does it add another layer?
It adds a fascinatingly different layer, while still, of course, prohibiting the same animal. Deuteronomy 14 lists essentially the same prohibited animals, but it significantly reframes the dietary laws. There's a different emphasis here. Crucially, the term ta'iba is used, often translated as abomination or detestable thing. This word gets attached to these forbidden foods. Now, ta'iba isn't just about something being unclean in a ritual sense, like needing purification. It carries a much heavier weight, a sense of moral revulsion, something God actively detests. It links eating these things more directly to broader moral transgressions, things like idolatry, which are presented as deeply offensive to Yahweh. So the focus subtly shifts. It moves from the specific cultic purity needed for the sanctuary towards a broader sense of communal ethics and collective identity. It seems to apply more directly to ordinary meat consumption in daily life. This probably reflects the realities of everyday existence in settled villages and towns, not just the highly ritualized context of the priests and the sanctuary described in Leviticus. Therefore, the pig's prohibition in Deuteronomy becomes part of a moral boundary, a clear ethical line in the sand. It delineates Israel's everyday life, setting it apart from surrounding peoples. It becomes a very public, daily expression of loyalty to Yahweh and a conscious differentiation from others who don't follow these covenant laws.
Wow. So, same animal, same basic rule, don't eat it, but two slightly different yet equally powerful motivations behind it. One very focused on ritual purity near the sacred, the other broadening out to moral and communal identity in everyday life. That really makes the pig an incredibly versatile and adaptable symbol, doesn't it?
It really does. As the scholar Aber Spicius puts it quite nicely, the pig, in this textual context, becomes an engineered exclusion. It was deliberately chosen, based on these dual criteria, the split hoof, but lack of cud chewing, specifically to dramatize Israel's unique difference. These foundational biblical texts clearly show the pig was always positioned right at a critical boundary. It was a creature whose consumption, or more importantly its avoidance, powerfully articulated who Israel was, both to itself internally and, crucially, to its neighbors externally.
Okay, but here's where the story takes another twist, right? It gets even more complex. Because while these powerful biblical texts present the prohibition as, well, absolute, binding, universal, the archaeological record, what the actual bones dug up from ancient sites tell us, often paints a more complicated picture. It doesn't always match that neat, straightforward textual command.
This is precisely where that interdisciplinary approach, highlighted so well in the collection Food Taboos and Biblical Prohibitions, becomes absolutely essential. We simply can't just take biblical laws as direct one-to-one reflections of daily practice across every single region and time period. Zooarchaeology, the study of animal bones from archaeological sites from the Iron Age across the Levant, reveals a much more nuanced reality. Pork avoidance wasn't uniform across ancient Israel and Judah, and importantly, it wasn't always tied neatly or only to ethnic identity in the way we might instinctively assume. The bones in the ground, they tell a messier, more human story sometimes. Yet consider the regional variations that pop up in the bone data. For instance, studies consistently show that pig bones are relatively more common in northern Israelite sites, especially in urban contexts, places like Tel Dan or Megiddo. This suggests that maybe pigs could be easily kept on household scraps in these denser areas, making them a viable part of the diet where perhaps other livestock were harder to maintain. But then, in stark contrast, you look at the highland sites of Judah, the Southern Kingdom. Pig remains there are consistently, strikingly scarce, often less than 1% of all the animal bones found. In those rugged, drier landscapes, the economy naturally leaned towards sheep and goats. They were just better suited for grazing and provided milk and wool too. Aber Spicius, looking at this divergence, suggests that the more consistent avoidance of pork in Judah aligns better with those later, stricter biblical prohibitions we just discussed. While Israel's northern kingdom seems to have been less stringent in actual practice, at least based on the bones, the significant regional difference really undermines any simple claim that avoiding pork was an early universal identifier for all Israelites everywhere.
That's a really key detail. So it wasn't some blanket rule everyone followed from day one. It varied quite a bit, maybe based on location, environment, economy. That definitely complicates how we think these laws first worked.
It absolutely does, and that leads to another critical point. It challenges that older idea of using pork bones, or the lack of them, as a straightforward ethnic marker in archaeology. Earlier scholarship often saw it pretty simply. Find no pig bones. Must be an Israelite site. Find pig bones. Must be Canaanite or Philistine. But as Altman, Angelini, and Spicius emphasize in their work, newer research stresses this really oversimplifies things. The presence or absence of pig bones isn't automatically just about ethnicity. Consumption patterns are deeply tied up with the local environment, what resources are available, economic choices people make. So while a lack of pig bones in Judah might eventually get reinterpreted through the lens of religious law, it might have initially pointed more towards ecological pragmatism. What simply made sense economically and agriculturally in that specific landscape. It might have been less about a conscious, deliberate statement of national identity at first. The law, in a way, perhaps came later to explain and codify an existing pattern.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? Connecting the practical realities of just getting by day to day with the eventual theological meaning. It makes you wonder how much of what we now see as purely religious or ethnic law might have started as a very practical adaptation that got reinterpreted later.
It's a profound question, and the evidence keeps adding layers. What's more, the faunal record, the animal bones, also gives us pretty compelling evidence that pork consumption persisted, even after these biblical laws were supposedly written down and circulating. Pig remains, maybe in smaller quantities sometimes, still show up at sites like Tildan, Ramat Rael, even Ashkelon, suggesting that not all Israelites, or perhaps their immediate neighbors living among them, always adhered strictly to the prohibitions. Jonathan Greer's analysis of finds at Tildan, for instance, is really insightful. He found pig bones not just in general trash pits, but in contexts that suggest they might have been part of ritual meals or household life, even within a clearly Israelite religious center. Evidence like that strongly implies that the textual prohibitions often function more as, let's say, aspirational norms, ideals that people should aim for rather than strict, universally enforced rules reflecting exactly what everyone ate every single day.
Okay, so archaeology paints this picture where pigs were never totally gone, yet the Bible makes avoiding them a truly defining central feature of identity. So what does this gap, this apparent disconnect between the ideal in the text and the often messier reality in the ground, tell us about the actual power of this prohibition?
Well, this paradox is incredibly revealing. It really highlights the immense symbolic force that the prohibition against pork eventually gained. Even if not every single household, in every single region, practiced it with absolute 100% strictness all the time. The idea of pork avoidance became increasingly important. It became less about the actual meat on the plate and more about drawing a powerful, evolving cultural line. It functioned as what scholars sometimes call identity work, a gradual, often complex process through which Judahite and later Jewish communities distinguished themselves from their neighbors. It was about aspiring to be different, to embody that unique covenantal relationship with God, even if the reality on the ground was, as you said, often a bit messier. And this very gap between the written ideal and the lived reality is precisely where the pig's power as a boundary marker seems to have intensified, particularly during that crucial period of identity formation for these communities. Let's look now at how this taboo really took root and solidified its place during that time.
All right, so we've journeyed from the world of abstract symbols with Mary Douglas through the complexities of ancient texts and into the messy reality revealed by bones in the ground. Our deep dive now shifts to a truly pivotal chapter, the Iron Age. This seems to be the crucible, the crucial moment when all these different threads, symbolic, textual, practical, converged, when the avoidance of pork really started to become an undeniable defining characteristic of Israelite and Judahite identity.
Yes, absolutely. The Iron Age, which is roughly from about 1200 down to 586 BCE, was a period of immense societal change in the southern Levant. You had the collapse of the big, powerful Bronze Age city-states, which created a significant power vacuum. This allowed lots of smaller highland communities, many of them proto-Israelite, to consolidate and gradually form their own distinct identities. In this era of what scholars call ethnogenesis, where new ethnic and national groups were literally being born, defining themselves, establishing clear cultural boundaries was absolutely essential. They needed ways to mark themselves off from the diverse people surrounding them. And what better, more visible arena for this differentiation than foodways? I mean, eating is a daily act, right? It's visible, it's communal, it's a constant performance of identity. And Max Price, who's done a lot of work on food taboos, points out something really striking from this period. Pigs, which were actually quite common in earlier times, like the Neolithic and Bronze Age economies across the region, they experienced a sharp, really dramatic decline in the Iron Age southern Levant. And this decline is particularly noticeable in Judah, the southern kingdom. Now, this reduction in pig consumption isn't just a random fluctuation. It directly coincides with the emergence of that distinct Israelite identity we've been talking about. And crucially, with the eventual writing and codification of the Torah, which, as we know, includes the explicit pig prohibition. What this strongly suggests is that something that might have begun as a highly practical ecological choice, pigs just being less suited for the arid, grazing-focused highlands of Judah where sheep and goats thrived, was eventually reinterpreted, reframed, given new meaning as divine law. The fact that pigs were already relatively absent in certain areas provided incredibly fertile ground, a sort of ready-made cultural pattern for this textual rule to take deep root and gain profound significance.
So it's almost like the practical realities of the landscape itself were speaking, in a way, and then those patterns were elevated, interpreted as a sacred decree. What might have started as just a sensible farming choice eventually became this foundational divine law, as if the environment itself was teaching a theological lesson.
That's a really powerful metaphor, and I think it captures the essence of this ideological project really well. And here, Mary Douglas's theory, the one we started with, comes right back into sharp focus. It helps clarify why the pig, specifically, carried such immense symbolic weight as a boundary marker during this critical period of identity formation of ethnogenesis. Pollution beliefs, as she argued, are basically social maps. They serve a crucial function. They guard the edges of a society's established order. They clearly mark what does not belong within its defined universe. In ancient Israel, the pig became this abomination, this toeba, precisely because it embodied that symbolic ambiguity. We talked about the cloven hoof, but no cud. It violated the very system of purity and categorical neatness that Israel's holiness code depended on. So by explicitly excluding the pig, Israel wasn't just enforcing its own conceptual universe and understanding of divine order. It was also creating a tangible, everyday dietary practice that powerfully reinforced its group identity. It was a concrete daily way for them to declare, this is who we are, and this is what makes us different, both in God's eyes and in the eyes of our neighbors. Now, it's really crucial to remember, as the archaeology reminds us, this wasn't some perfectly uniform overnight switch. The zooarchaeological data we discussed confirms that. You still find pig bones in some northern Israelite context, showing that actual practice often lagged behind the developing ideology or the written law. However, the cultural meaning of avoiding pork began to solidify and gain strength, perhaps even outpacing the material reality on the ground everywhere. As scholars like Altman and Angelini argue, biblical laws are maybe best understood not always as direct, literal descriptions of what everyone ate everywhere, but rather as powerful prescriptive ideals, goals to strive for. In Judah, where pigs were already less common, likely due to ecological factors, the law effectively codified these existing patterns, reinterpreting them as sacred commands directly from Yahweh. So the Iron Age really represents that critical moment, the time when abstention from pork solidified as a key identity marker. Initially influenced by ecology, then symbolically charged by its anomalous nature, and finally becoming unequivocally theological and enshrined in sacred law.
It's like, yeah, creating a rule for something that's kind of already happening in some places, but then giving it this profound new meaning, elevating it, making it a cornerstone of who you are as a distinct people. That's a masterclass in identity building, really.
Couldn't agree more. And by the end of the Iron Age, the pork taboo had absolutely become one of several key practices, alongside things like circumcision and observing the Sabbath that powerfully distinguished Israel and Judah for the diverse people surrounding them. What had perhaps once been, in part, a practical adaptation to certain landscapes was transformed into this highly visible badge of belonging, a clear marker of holiness before God and an undeniable statement of difference from outsiders. The prohibition took root not just as another dietary regulation, but as a deeply meaningful boundary ritual, one that defined who was inside and who was outside the covenantal community. And this powerful internal identity marker, forged in the highlands of the Iron Age, was about to face a truly monumental external challenge. As Israel entered the much wider cosmopolitan Greco-Roman world, where, ironically, pork wasn't just accepted, it was king.
Okay, so if the Iron Age was about the pig taboo emerging as this internal marker, defining Israelite holiness and distinction within their own worldview, then the next big phase, the Greco-Roman period, seems to transform it into something else entirely. It becomes this highly public badge of Jewish difference, and crucially, even an act of cultural resistance against a dominant power. It moves from an internal understanding to a very external declaration, doesn't it?
Indeed. The entire Mediterranean world of that era, think Greece, Rome, Egypt, Syria, all connected, was absolutely saturated with pork culture. Pork wasn't just, common food. It was arguably the most celebrated meat. It was a staple for the masses, sure, but also a delicacy for the elite. Roman authors like Pliny or Cato, they frequently praised its taste, its versatility, and it played a central, really indispensable role in a religious life, sacrificial rituals, big civic banquets, everyday meals across the empire. It was just woven into the very fabric of their social and religious existence. And the archaeology strongly backs this up. Excavations at Hellenistic and Roman urban sites consistently reveal that pig bones often make up a really significant chunk of the animal remains found, like 15–20%, sometimes even more. That's not a trivial amount. It really speaks to how ubiquitous it was. So to consume pork in that context, it was more than just eating a meal. It was, in a pretty profound sense, kind of like ingesting Romanness itself. It was participating deeply in the dominant culinary culture that helped unify the vast, diverse Roman Empire. It acted as a sort of social glue.
Wow. So against that backdrop, this pervasive, almost celebratory enthusiasm for pork Jewish avoidance must have really, really stood out. It would have made them incredibly conspicuous, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It stood out in stark, unmistakable contrast. Max Price, the scholar we mentioned, vividly describes this clash as a profound cultural fault line. On one side, you have pork, symbolizing Greco-Roman conviviality, shared meals, social integration, imperial unity. And on the other side, Jewish extension from pork marked this deliberate, unwavering boundary of exclusion, a conscious refusal to partake in these culturally central practices. This difference wasn't subtle at all. It was a daily, visible declaration. And ancient critics noticed. Prominent Roman satirists, like Juvenal, for example, openly mocked Jews for refusing pork, often painting them as strange, unsociable, even misanthropic. As Jordan Rosenblum points out in his work, The Simple Question, Why Don't You Eat Pork?, and Roman Palestine basically became cultural shorthand. It was a direct, immediate way to flag Jewish distinctiveness in a world that largely saw pig as, well, perfectly normal, even desirable food. Importantly, this period saw the meaning and the implications of the taboo expand significantly. Remember how in Leviticus, it was mostly about ritual holiness for the sanctuary? And in Deuteronomy, it became about binding the community through moral law in daily life. Well, now, in the Greco-Roman context, pork avoidance took on a crucial new political dimension. To abstain wasn't just about keeping covenant with God anymore. It was also an active, conscious rejection of assimilation into the dominant imperial culture. It became a profound form of everyday resistance, a quiet but powerful signal of steadfastness, loyalty to their own traditions, and an assertion of distinct identity under foreign rule. It was, in effect, a refusal to conform, enacted right there at the dinner table every single day.
This is where it really shifts, doesn't it? Moving beyond just religious observance to become this overt act of cultural, maybe even political defiance. It's almost like a silent daily protest against empire played out with food.
Absolutely. And furthermore, the pork taboo also became a key differentiator, drawing a really clear line between Jews and the emerging group of early Christians. While Christianity, particularly as it spread among Gentiles, gradually relaxed, many of the Jewish dietary laws, seeing them as part of the Old Covenant Judaism, steadfastly maintained pork abstention. It remained a non-negotiable fundamental practice. Max Price insightfully argues that this divergence further cemented pork's role as a potent marker of Jewish peoplehood, not just religious belief, but ethnic and cultural identity. Christians began to emphasize orthodoxy, what one believes is the primary identifier, whereas Jews, and later, as we'll see, Muslims, continued to emphasize orthopraxy, what one does in daily practice. The pig, then, literally stood right at the center of this major civilizational crossroads. It embodied the fundamental differences between these communities, all grappling for identity and influence under the immense shadow of Roman power. So by the 1st century CE, the pig wasn't just some forbidden animal within Israel's internal ritual code anymore. It had truly transformed. It had become a kind of cultural antagonist to Jewish existence in the wider Mediterranean world. The refusal to eat pork was both a deeply felt act of faith and a highly visible public performance of distinctiveness, all in a world that often regarded pork as the height of civilized cuisine and a key symbol of imperial belonging. So the taboo evolved again from being about cosmic purity to profoundly defining a people's identity and solidarity against powerful external pressures.
So this animal literally went from being symbolically out of place within their own cosmic system to being literally out of place on the Jewish plate, defining us versus them in a deeply public and impactful way. And this powerful legacy of abstention of identity sharpened by imperial pressure. It was about to be inherited and reinterpreted yet again, this time by a new global faith, Islam, solidifying the pig's role as a truly universal taboo. Right, so when Islam emerges so dramatically in the 7th century CE, it enters a world already profoundly shaped by these ancient dietary traditions and shaped by the powerful symbolic weight the pig already carried, particularly in Judaism. And in a really fascinating turn, Islam doesn't reject this prohibition, it absorbs it, but it gives it a monumental new global reach and perhaps subtly different meaning.
That's precisely right. Islam inherited and skillfully reinterpreted many existing dietary traditions from the late antique Near East. It didn't arise in a vacuum. And in doing so, the prohibition of pork became one of the clearest, most universally understood markers of submission to God's will of being Muslim. Unlike Christianity, which, as we discussed, largely relaxed dietary laws to facilitate conversion and universality in a different way, Islam preserved the pork taboo with unwavering conviction. And crucially, it extended this prohibition across the entire Ummah, the burgeoning global Muslim community. It codified abstention as an act of profound orthopraxy, meaning right practice, a visible, shared, and non-negotiable way of demonstrating one's faith and belonging to that global community. If you look at the Qur'an itself, it contains multiple, clear, unambiguous prohibitions of swine flesh. They appear in several different chapters or surahs like 2.173, 5.3, 6.145, and 16.115. These verses consistently list pork alongside other forbidden items, things like carrion, meaning animals that died naturally, not ritually slaughtered blood, and animals not properly sacrificed in God's name. They explicitly label these things as haram, forbidden. Now, importantly, these texts also usually include clauses allowing for exceptions in cases of dire necessity, like starvation. This frames divine law as both absolute in its command and merciful in its application, acknowledging human limits and hardship. As Max Price observes, the Qur'an effectively universalizes this taboo. It takes it out of the specific cultural struggles and historical identity formation of Judaism, which was tied in many ways to a particular people and land, and places it within a broader, more expansive framework. It becomes part of God's law, intended for all humankind who submit to Him. This is a really crucial transformative shift. It's no longer just for a specific group. It becomes a global, enduring principle for all believers wherever they are.
Okay, so in Islam, the ban isn't just like a historical echo of ancient purity rules, or solely a form of resistance to a specific empire like Rome. It seems to take on a new, much more central and enduring role in shaping daily life and identity across the globe. So what exactly does orthopraxy mean in this Islamic context, and why is it so profoundly important for understanding the pig prohibition here?
That's a really incisive question, and it gets to a fundamental aspect of Islamic identity, historically and today. In Islam, the prohibition of pork became absolutely central precisely because it reinforced the unity of practice. Many scholars emphasize that Islam, perhaps more so than some other traditions, defines community and belonging primarily through orthopraxy, what one does consistently, rather than solely through orthodoxy, what one believes. Now, obviously belief is foundational, absolutely. But the outward expression of that belief through consistent, shared actions is paramount for communal identity and cohesion. So abstention from pork joined other fundamental pillars of daily practice, things like the 5 daily prayers, salat, fasting during the month of Ramadan, giving charity, zakat. It became another highly visible shared marker of obedience to God. It provided a simple yet incredibly powerful way for Muslims everywhere to embody communal discipline and express their shared faith. You'd see it reflected in markets, at mealtimes, in daily social interactions across incredibly diverse societies and cultures. It cemented a shared identity through shared action, a tangible connection to the global ummah. And Islam's adoption of the pork taboo represents quite clearly a powerful continuity with Jewish law. It acknowledges the shared Abrahamic heritage, but at the same time, it establishes a very sharp contrast with mainstream Christian practice. So while Jews and Muslims steadfastly maintain abstention from pork as a central tenet, Christians, as we noted, often define themselves against such dietary restrictions. They emphasize freedom from what they interpreted as the yoke of the law under a new covenant of grace. This theological and practical divergence ensured that pork remained a distinct boundary marker right across the 3 major Abrahamic faiths. It kind of united Judaism and Islam in this particular dietary practice, while simultaneously setting both apart from Christianity. So, by making pork avoidance a universal law for all believers, Islam truly transformed what had once been a more localized dietary restriction, rooted perhaps in specific ecological and cultural contexts of the ancient Levant. It transformed it into a global, transnational marker of faith. You see it practiced across vastly different environments and cultures, from the deserts of Arabia to the markets of West Africa, the diverse lands of South Asia, the islands of Southeast Asia. Everywhere, the refusal to eat pork became a shared, instantly recognizable sign of belonging to the global Muslim community. The pig was thus elevated, you could say, from being a regional anomaly, maybe a symbolic puzzle in the ancient Levant, to becoming a truly global symbol of religious discipline, communal identity, and shared practice.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it, how a single animal, through these successive layers of interpretation and reinterpretation over millennia, could come to carry so much historical and religious weight. Connecting such disparate cultures across vast geographical regions, all through this profound shared act of avoidance, the pig really does become this kind of eternal symbol.
Exactly. In Islam, abstaining from pork wasn't primarily about ecology anymore, or just symbolic anomaly within a specific taxonomy, or even just resistance to a particular empire. It became fundamentally about living rightly before God, about enacting one's faith through consistent bodily practice, a daily commitment. The prohibition thus became both portable, you could take it anywhere, and permanent. It became effectively detached from its original historical and geographical context, yet it retained all of its ancient force and symbolic power. But the story doesn't stop in ancient or medieval times, does it? Our sources make it clear that the pig's symbolic power continues to echo, very powerfully, right into our modern world, proving just how enduring these deeply rooted taboos can be.
Okay, so after literally millennia of evolving meaning and widespread impact, what does this ancient taboo look like today, here in the 21st century? Our deep dive reveals something quite striking. The prohibition of pork, though it was born way back in the symbolic world of Leviticus and got sharpened under the pressures of Rome, it hasn't faded away, not at all. It has endured, and it continues to function as a potent cultural and sometimes even political boundary across diverse societies around the globe.
Absolutely. The pig, even now, remains far more than just, an animal on a farm or meat on a plate. It's still a potent marker of identity. It's often a flashpoint for controversy, sadly. And it serves as a powerful, enduring reminder of how deeply these ancient taboos can persist, adapt, and resonate through rapidly changing times and our increasingly globalized world. Its story, remarkably, is still unfolding. New chapters are being written even as we speak. Take the modern state of Israel, for example. It's a fascinating case study. The pork taboo there has actually become a matter of both national law and significant public debate. Despite Israel having very strong secular foundations, laws restricting pig farming and the sale of pork were enacted back in the 1960s. This was largely due to pressure from influential religious political parties. As Jordan Rosenblum points out, pork in Israel isn't just food. It's become a symbol deeply entangled with national struggle and identity. It reflects that ongoing tension between secular and religious Israelis. For some Israelis, eating pork might signal a kind of assimilation into secular Western culture, or maybe even a rebellion against traditional religious authority. While for others, supporting the ban affirms a vital continuity with millennia of Jewish tradition and helps define a distinct national character. The very persistence of these often heated debates really highlights the pig's enduring role as a boundary marker. But now, interestingly, it's functioning within Jewish society itself, reflecting those ongoing, sometimes contentious negotiations about what it truly means to be Jewish in a modern, diverse state.
That's a really fascinating point. How an external boundary, originally forged against other cultures, can then kind of turn inward and become an internal one, delineating different identities within the same community.
It's a powerful demonstration of the taboo's adaptability, isn't it? And then, if we turn to the Muslim world, the pork taboo remains one of the most universally observed practices globally. In societies where Muslims are the majority, avoiding pork is typically both a matter of religious law, often enshrined in legal codes, and a deeply ingrained social expectation. Violations can carry significant social stigma. And even in diaspora communities for Muslims living as minorities in secular contexts in Europe, North America, elsewhere, refraining from pork frequently becomes a highly visible and deliberate act. It's a way of maintaining their Muslim identity, a daily reaffirmation of faith in a non-Muslim environment. The anthropologist Jonathan Brumberg Krauss accurately describes this kind of abstention as a form of ritual resistance to assimilation. It echoes those cultural clashes we saw way back in the Greco-Roman period. It's a continuous lived assertion of identity and faith, connecting Muslims worldwide through this shared tangible practice. And for Christians, well, the pig has largely evolved into what we might call a reverse marker. Its consumption often actively distinguishes Christianity from both Judaism and Islam. Remember, from the early church fathers onward, Christian thinkers often emphasized freedom from the dietary laws of the Old Testament as a key symbol of grace, not law, a sign of the new covenant established through Christ. This foundational theological stance continues to resonate today for many Christians. It makes pork consumption one of the most striking and persistent practical boundaries between the three Abrahamic traditions. It's not about avoiding the pig for most Christians, but rather, perhaps implicitly, about embracing the freedom to eat it as a sign of a different theological path, highlighting that profound divergence.
But this is where the story, unfortunately, can take a darker, more cynical turn. Beyond its complex religious and cultural significance, our sources reveal that pork remains politically charged. Sometimes it's actively, deliberately used as a tool for division and antagonism.
Absolutely, and sadly, yes. In parts of Europe, particularly in recent years, we've seen some anti-immigration movements regrettably weaponize pork as a kind of cultural symbol. They might promote its consumption in public schools or at civic events with a pretty clear aim of excluding or antagonizing Muslim and Jewish minorities, deliberately challenging their dietary laws and cultural norms. In these deeply charged contemporary contexts, the pig once again functions as a powerful symbol of identity. But now in a perverted, reversed way, it's weaponized to police the boundaries of national belonging, to assert a specific cultural dominance using food as a divisive instrument. This just shows the enduring, almost primal power that this ancient taboo still holds, even in modern secular political discourse.
It's truly astonishing when you trace it all the way through, from Iron Age Israel through Rome, the rise of Islam, right up to 21st century Europe, from Quranic Medina to modern Paris. The pig's symbolic role has not only endured but continues to be reinvented and redeployed across all these different cultural battlegrounds.
Its flesh is indeed far more than just meat. It has become this potent site where identity, power, and belonging are continuously contested, negotiated, and reaffirmed generation after generation. The pig really does remain the quintessential forbidden food. It carried the immense weight of millennia of cultural negotiation and boundary making. It's a living testament to the enduring power of human classification, symbolic meaning, and the ways we define ourselves through what we consume or refuse to consume. Hashtag tag tag Archaeological.
Wow. Okay, that was a truly incredible deep dive. We've traced the history of the pig prohibition, not as some simple static rule that just appeared one day, but as this incredibly dynamic, living boundary marker, one whose meaning shifted so profoundly across time and culture, constantly adapting to new challenges and new contexts.
Yeah, we started our journey way back with Mary Douglas's really revolutionary insight, didn't we? Understanding the pig as this kind of cosmic anomaly in Leviticus, a creature that, by blurring the clean, divinely set categories, actually dramatized the crucial separation of the sacred from the profane. Then we saw how Deuteronomy reframed it, making it more of a communal imperative, embedding the pig, or rather its avoidance, into Israel's daily life as a visible sign of covenant loyalty and a clear differentiation from the peoples around them.
And then archaeology, with its tales told in those ancient bones and settlement layers, it beautifully complicated the picture, didn't it? It showed us that Israelite avoidance wasn't just about ecology, revealing that fascinating gap between the ideal law in the texts and the often messier reality on the ground. Yet, despite all that complexity, archaeology still confirmed that abstention did crystallize. It became a profoundly powerful ethnic and religious identifier during that critical Iron Age period of ethnogenesis.
Then, under the immense pressures of Greco-Roman rule, the prohibition morphed again. It became this potent badge of peoplehood, a visible act of profound resistance against a dominant empire that widely celebrated the very thing they refused to eat. And then, centuries later, Islam inherited, preserved, and truly universalized this ancient taboo, making it an enduring cornerstone of orthopraxy right practice across incredibly diverse lands and peoples. A truly global marker of faith and shared practice that resonates powerfully right up to this day.
So what does this whole remarkable journey of the pig prohibition ultimately mean for us, thinking about it now? This deep dive really shows us, I think, that the ban on pork was never simply about health concerns or environmental practicalities, though those might have played a role at times. It was really, at its very core, profoundly about identity, about cosmic order, and about resistance. And it constantly adapted its meaning and its power through every twist and turn of history.
Exactly. The prohibition of pork reveals, perhaps more clearly than almost any other food rule, the deep and often hidden power of food to carry symbolic meaning far, far beyond mere nutrition. It illustrates how a single animal, seemingly anomalous in its biology according to ancient taxonomies, yet pretty ordinary in its flesh, could be transformed into a cosmic emblem, a defining ethnic badge, a core religious law, and even, quite disturbingly at times, a potent political weapon. Its long journey is really a testament to how societies consistently use the body and its appetites, what we eat, or crucially, what we refuse to eat, to draw and maintain those fundamental lines of identity, of belonging, and of difference.
So maybe as you go about your day, perhaps preparing a meal later or sharing food with family or friends, take just a moment to think about the foods that define you, your family, or your community. What are the unspoken rules you follow, maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously? What are the hidden stories of identity and belonging, the subtle boundaries woven into the very fabric of your meals?
Yeah, and it raises a really important question for our modern world, doesn't it? In a time when we're often striving for common ground, for global understanding, do ancient, deeply ingrained taboos like the pig prohibition still serve a vital function? Perhaps in maintaining unique cultural distinctiveness? Or do they present a continuous challenge to unity and integration? and what other forbidden or sacred foods might be out there, silently shaping the boundaries of our modern world in ways we don't even fully perceive. The pig isn't just forbidden in many ways, it is the forbidden. A living reminder of how ancient choices, ancient symbols continue to shape modern faith, politics, and our very sense of who we are.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and please join us next time for another deep dive into the fascinating layers of knowledge.